It is June 20th, and we have some very interesting reports coming from the battlefield. A recent ISW report stated that there might be a pause in the Ukrainian offensive to reevaluate tactics. While the reason for this remains a complete mystery, the Russians have decided to take the opportunity to launch their own counteroffensive on Ukrainian lines all across the front. The Russians could be doing this because they smell blood in the water, and they are not going to give the Ukrainians an opportunity to regroup and try to penetrate the Zaporozhye line again. On the flip side, this could all be part of a Ukrainian plan leading the Russians into a trap. Let's break it down in today's Frontline Report. First, we're going to start off in the Zaporizhia settlement of Pyatkatki, where the Ukrainians have now claimed full control over the village, but that control is hard fought. The Russian army is constantly launching attacks to recapture the village, with several Russian sources claiming they have actually achieved its recapture, only for others to then say the Ukrainians have moved back in. Obviously, I cannot confirm the validity of any of these reports. The only thing that we can tell for certain is that at the time of this recording, the Ukrainians still control the town. Next, we will move to the area of Orekiv, where the Russians have started their counterattack and taken some ground. But before we get into the details of that, I would like to remind everyone to please consider hitting both that like and subscribe button, actions that are totally free for you to do, but are a big help for me to grow the channel. Also consider hitting the bell icon so you do not miss the next update. If you're looking for ways to support the channel, you can do so by using the super chat feature in the comment section, where all donations are appreciated. The Ukrainian military have been attempting to force the Russians back along the T-0408 highway that runs from Orekiv to Robotny. I'm sorry guys, I'm probably butchering the name of this town. Anyways, while so far they haven't had success in reaching Robotny, they did manage to force the Russian army back in the area of Balka Uspinivska, which is a local nature preserve. Unfortunately for the Ukrainians, this is where the Russians decided to counterattack last night, recapturing the nature reserve plus some additional ground and completely unraveling the Ukrainian gains in the area. This report comes from Suryat Maps, who is a trusted source of accurate battlefield mapping for this channel. Next, we will move on to the area of Veloka Novosilka, where we are getting reports from Live UA Map, which is a pro-Ukrainian mapping source, that the Ukrainian army is attempting to advance in the directions of Prayutny and Staromayorsk. We do not have a lot of word from either side about these activities, but both sides appear to be claiming in the macro overall the intensity of Ukrainian offensive operations is dropping off rather quickly. This information comes as the ISW, or Institute for the Study of War, a military think tank located in Washington, D.C., owned by the Newland and Kagan families, which is closely linked to the Biden administration, released a tweet saying that Ukrainian forces might be temporarily pausing offensive operations to reevaluate their tactics for future operations. While the statement is very vague, we do have some takeaways from it and from what we have seen. So the three things that we absolutely know for a fact: Zaporozhye is very large and flat. Ukraine has a finite number of trained combat troops and equipment available for this offensive. And third, Ukraine has taken losses, not saying how many, we just know that they exist. So by the ISW saying that Ukraine needs to reevaluate tactics for future operations, obviously they're concerned with the future, my takeaway from that is that Ukrainian losses are high enough, and the percentage of Zaporozhye they need to capture is still large enough that at the current rate of losses, Ukraine cannot achieve its objectives. That is a bold statement, I know, but all things considering, I do not think it's too far out there. So what I'm saying, and what I think the ISW is saying, is that Ukraine needs to do something different if they want to reach Melitopol. That's my point in saying this. I'm not saying this to say that Russian propaganda is right and Ukrainian propaganda is wrong. I'm just saying that there's clearly been photographic evidence of some pretty heavy losses in the mechanized formations of some of these early Ukrainian assaults, and Ukraine has made some gains, but they have a long ways to go if they want to capture Melitopol, Berdyansk, and approach Mariupol. So I'm really not saying anything that crazy here. So this could be real. This pause in operations. Ukraine could be on an operational pause despite the reports of fighting, which would make sense because we aren't really getting nearly as much video of assault operations from either side for the most part. Or this could be a bit of deception to lure the Russians in, meaning a large Ukrainian assault is just around the corner. I can't say for sure. I am not there and I only get like second or third hand information from the front. But that's just my assessment, kind of my speculation on the situation. So despite the uncertainty, Russia has began larger scale attacks on the far eastern fronts of Ukraine. So we will go through those now. In the area just south of Marinka, the Russians have launched an attack on a long-standing Ukrainian stronghold that they claim to have captured. Along with this, we are seeing a new Russian tactic that is extremely terrifying. It appears Russia is packing old armored vehicles with tons of explosives, rigging up a remote piloting system, and driving these vehicles into Ukrainian lines and detonating them. You can see here a vehicle of what I believe is a Russian T-64 tank, possibly T-72 tank, probably with some kind of issue, like say it doesn't have a working turret or gun. Very fortunately for the Ukrainians, the tank hits a mine before it reaches the Ukrainian position, which appears to be a larger entrenched outpost. The tank smokes for a minute before a Ukrainian soldier finally hits it with a rocket, likely unaware of the danger, and the result is a colossal detonation. Despite the distance, it still likely did significant damage to the Ukrainian trench network, although it obviously could have been way worse. A second video of this tactic has sprang up, this time in the form of an MTLB, which is basically a battle taxi. This time the vehicle actually made it into Ukrainian lines and destroyed the position. Assault actions continued on the Ukrainian-held areas of Marinka and Novo-Mikhailovka, and further to the north, Russian forces have attempted another advance on Avdiivka, which it appears Ukrainian defenders have managed to force back, although we are getting a lot of video footage from the area of what looks like rather intense fighting. Ukrainian sources also claim that the Russian army has attempted to advance again north of Bakhmut, but for the most part, it appears like in this area the Ukrainian army is the one that is actually slowly retaking back the salient around Berkivka. So despite the fact we have claims of Russian attacks in the area, the map here probably looks different than I have it plotted out. I haven't seen any reliable mapping updates of the area yet. I will try to search and find one, but there's probably a lot less control, a lot less area in this region, in the salient, that's actually under Russian control, and more areas that have been recaptured by Ukraine. So both sides clashing north of Bakhmut. We are getting reports from several sources, including the Ukrainian army themselves, that the most difficult front right now is actually the northern Lugansk front, where Ukrainian troops are trying to cope with Russian attacks from the forests of Kreminna all the way to the north of Kupiansk. Video has surfaced of what appears to be successful Russian assault actions and gains in the forests between Kreminna and Bielogorivka, although these are very tough to geolocate and map out. Slightly to the north, we have reports of Russian advances near Dubrova and on the Ukrainian-held town of Zarichny and Torske. Specifically, there's a lot of chatter about the Russians attempting to break through to Torske. So it sounds to me from the reports like this is more of a developing situation, but these could just be probing attacks that have already kind of died off. Finally, in the area north of Kupiansk, we are getting reports of an attempted Russian advance on Senkivka, a key village holding the Russians back from officially besieging Kupiansk. But we do not have any report on the outcome of those battles, and I'm thinking it's probably very likely that Ukrainian defenders held off that Russian attack. In total, we have a situation very different than a few days ago. Both the Russians and Ukrainians are attempting to advance, but now the Russians are placing pressure on more areas than the Ukrainians have been in the last week or so. In terms of issues the Ukrainian military is dealing with, the biggest ones are still FPV drones, Lancet drones, and Russian Alligator helicopters, which we haven't really had a chance to talk about yet, but they are having a very devastating effect on the Ukrainian military. So, out of those three things, the alligators, which effective, are most effective in a kind of a standoff, hover and fire role, which is where they'll sit back 8 or 10, perhaps even 10 kilometers away from the front line, hovering a couple 100 feet off the ground, searching for Ukrainian vehicles to hit with like anti-tank missiles. So this supposedly keeps them out of sight of Ukrainian soldiers, completely out of range of man pads, things like that, and out of range and below radar cover of most Ukrainian SAM systems. But the Ukrainian army, nevertheless, is claiming they have managed to destroy 3 of these helicopters in the last few days, and we all actually have a video here of an additional 1 Alligator helicopter losing its tail due to its but due to its dual rotors, it is able to keep flying and limp back to base. So, of course, Russia has many of these machines, and they make new ones, but they certainly do not produce 3 to 4 a week. So, if this is true, and if these losses continue, Russia will be forced to use the attack helicopters more conservatively, holding them back from the front and taking on a smaller share of the fighting workload. All right, guys, that is it from me today. Thank you all for tuning in, and until next time.